The sound of rain drumming against the cracked windows of the downtown community center mixed with the soft melody drifting from the old upright piano in the corner. 16-year-old Luna Rodriguez pressed her worn sneakers against the dusty floor, her fingers dancing across keys that had seen better decades. The instrument was missing 3 keys and perpetually out of tune, but to Luna, it sang like a concert grand. She had discovered this forgotten piano 2 years ago, while waiting for her mother to finish her evening shift, cleaning the offices upstairs. What started as curious exploration had become a sacred ritual. Every weekday evening, while her mother scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans 3 floors above, Luna would slip into the abandoned community room and lose herself in melodies she created from memory and heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Luna's world was painted in shades of struggle that most people her age couldn't fathom. The apartment she shared with her mother and younger brother Carlos was a cramped 2-bedroom unit in the Riverside housing project, where sirens provided the nighttime soundtrack and broken elevators meant climbing 8 flights of stairs with groceries. Her mother, Isabella, worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, cleaning offices at night, serving lunch at the elementary school cafeteria, and doing laundry for wealthy families on weekends. Despite the exhaustion that permanently lined Isabella's face, she never missed asking Luna about school, never forgot to help Carlos with his homework, and never stopped believing that her children deserved more than the circumstances they were born into. Music had always been Luna's escape from the harsh realities surrounding her. As a child, she would hum melodies while helping her mother fold other people's clothes, creating symphonies from the rhythm of washing machines and the whisper of fabric softener. When other kids played with toys their families couldn't afford, Luna would tap out rhythms on cardboard boxes and kitchen pots. She had an instinctive understanding of harmony and rhythm that seemed to flow from somewhere deep within her soul, a gift that neither poverty nor circumstance could diminish. The community center piano had become her secret conservatory. The instrument had been donated years earlier by a local church, but budget cuts had ended the music program that was supposed to use it. Now it sat abandoned, a forgotten relic in a room that smelled of old coffee and broken dreams. Luna had taught herself to play by watching YouTube videos on her mother's cracked phone screen, and by listening to classical music streaming from the library's public computers. She would memorize pieces by famous composers, then rush to the community center to attempt them on the battered keys. Her fingers had learned to compensate for the missing notes, and her ear had adjusted to the piano's imperfect tuning. She played Bach inventions and Chopin nocturnes with a passion that transcended the limitations of her instrument. For Luna, music represented everything her current life lacked: beauty, elegance, and the possibility of a different future. When she played, the walls of the housing project seemed to dissolve, replaced by concert halls and conservatories she had only seen in photographs. She imagined herself dressed in elegant gowns, performing for audiences who understood the language she spoke through black and white keys. These dreams felt both impossible and absolutely necessary, like breathing underwater or flying without wings. The harsh reality of Luna's daily existence made her musical dreams seem almost cruel in their impossibility. She attended Washington High School, an underfunded institution where textbooks were outdated, class sizes were overwhelming, and college counselors were spread too thin to provide meaningful guidance. Most of her classmates were focused on survival, working part-time jobs to help their families, avoiding the drug dealers who lurked near the school entrance, and trying to graduate despite an education system that seemed designed to fail them. Luna excelled academically despite these obstacles, maintaining a 3.8 GPA, while working weekends at a local grocery store to contribute to the family income. Her mother had always supported Luna's love of music, even though she couldn't understand it fully. Isabella would sometimes stand quietly outside the community center room, listening to her daughter play melodies that seemed to come from another world entirely. She recognized the joy and peace that music brought to Luna's life, and she understood instinctively that her daughter possessed something rare and precious. However, Isabella also understood the practical realities of their situation. Piano lessons were an impossible luxury when choosing between groceries and rent was a monthly struggle. Music school was a fantasy when community college seemed financially unreachable. Luna's brother Carlos, 2 years younger and fiercely protective of his sister, often accompanied her to the community center. He would do homework at a nearby table while Luna practiced, occasionally looking up to watch her fingers move across the keys with an expression of wonder and pride. Carlos understood that his sister was special, even if he couldn't articulate exactly how. He had heard other kids at school make fun of Luna's second-hand clothes and her family's situation, and he had gotten into more than one fight defending her honor. The bond between the siblings was forged in shared hardship and mutual protection, a partnership born of necessity and strengthened by genuine love. The community center itself was a reflection of the neighborhood's economic struggles. The building had been constructed in the 1970s with good intentions and federal funding, designed to serve as a hub for community activities and social services. However, decades of budget cuts had stripped away most of its programs. The basketball court had broken hoops and water-stained floors. The computer lab contained machines that were obsolete before Luna was born. The kitchen facility was closed due to health code violations that no one had money to fix. Only a few rooms remained functional: a small library with donated books, a meeting space used by various community groups, and the forgotten music room where Luna had found her sanctuary. Despite its decay, the community center served an important role in the neighborhood. It was a safe space where kids could escape the streets, where elderly residents could socialize, and where families could access basic services. Mrs. Chen, the center's director, was a tireless advocate for the community who somehow managed to keep the facility running on prayers and determination. She had noticed Luna's evening piano sessions and had never interfered, understanding instinctively that the girl had found something precious in that run-down room. Luna's musical education was entirely self-directed, a testament to both her natural ability and her incredible determination. She would spend hours at the public library, checking out books about music theory and composer biographies. She memorized the stories of great musicians, learning about Mozart's prodigious childhood, Beethoven's triumph over deafness, and Clara Schumann's struggle for recognition in a male-dominated field. These stories became her inspiration, proof that extraordinary music could emerge from challenging circumstances. The internet became Luna's conservatory. She discovered online piano tutorials, music theory courses, and recordings of the world's greatest performers. She would watch videos repeatedly, studying hand positions and pedal techniques, then rush to the community center to practice what she had learned. Her progress was remarkable considering her circumstances. Within 2 years of discovering the piano, she was attempting pieces that challenged advanced students at expensive music schools. Luna's playing had a quality that transcended technical proficiency. She possessed an intuitive understanding of musical expression that couldn't be taught in any classroom. When she played a slow movement, audiences could feel the melancholy in their bones. When she tackled a rapid passage, her fingers seemed to dance with joy across the keys. Her interpretations were deeply personal, filtered through her experiences of struggle, hope, and an unshakable belief in beauty's power to transform lives. The isolation of Luna's musical journey sometimes felt overwhelming. She had no teacher to guide her progress, no peers to share the excitement of mastering a difficult passage, no mentor to help her navigate the complex world of classical music. She made mistakes that a trained instructor would have corrected immediately, developed habits that would later need to be unlearned, and struggled with concepts that could have been explained simply by an experienced teacher. However, this isolation also gave her something valuable, a completely personal relationship with music, unburdened by others' expectations or conventional approaches. Luna's family situation added layers of complexity to her musical aspirations. Her father had left when she was 10 years old, unable to handle the pressure of financial stress and family responsibility. His departure had devastated the family emotionally and economically, forcing Isabella to take on additional work and Luna to assume more household responsibilities. The absence of a father figure meant that Luna often served as a role model for Carlos while also pursuing her own dreams. She helped him with homework, walked him to school when the neighborhood felt dangerous, and tried to shield him from the worst aspects of their economic struggles. The weight of family responsibility sometimes conflicted with Luna's musical ambitions. Practice time had to be stolen between household chores, babysitting duties and part-time work. There were evenings when she was too exhausted to play, nights when the community center was closed for repairs, and periods when family crises consumed all her emotional energy. However, these challenges also deepened her connection to music. Every moment at the piano became precious because it was hard-won.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Every melody she mastered felt like a victory against impossible odds. Luna's understanding of classical music was shaped by her unique perspective as an outsider looking in. She didn't know the social conventions and unspoken rules that governed the classical music world. She hadn't been raised in the culture of conservatories and private lessons that shaped most serious musicians. This outsider status was both a disadvantage and a strength. While she lacked formal training and social connections, she also approached music with fresh eyes and an authentic voice unclouded by academic expectations. The community where Luna lived was rich in musical traditions, though they were different from the European classical tradition she was teaching herself. The neighborhood resonated with salsa rhythms from open windows, gospel harmonies from storefront churches, and hip-hop beats from car stereos. Luna absorbed all of these influences, and they subtly shaped her classical interpretations. Her Chopin had a rhythmic pulse influenced by Latin music. Her Bach carried emotional weight informed by gospel traditions. She was creating a unique musical voice that bridged different worlds. Despite her passion and natural ability, Luna rarely shared her musical dreams with anyone. The gap between her aspirations and her circumstances seemed too vast to explain. How could she tell her classmates that she dreamed of performing at Carnegie Hall when they struggled to understand why she spent time on something so impractical? How could she explain to her mother that music felt like destiny when the family needed every dollar she could earn at her weekend job? The silence around her dreams created a sense of isolation that sometimes felt unbearable. Luna's academic performance remained strong despite all the challenges in her life. She understood instinctively that education was the most reliable path out of poverty, and she approached her studies with the same determination she brought to music. Her teachers recognized her intelligence and work ethic, but they also saw the signs of stress that came from too much responsibility at too young an age. She often looked tired in morning classes, having stayed up late practicing or helping Carlos with projects. Her clothes were clean but obviously worn, and she rarely participated in school activities that required money for fees or equipment. The high school's music program was limited to a basic choir and a struggling marching band with instruments held together by duct tape and hope. The music teacher, Mr. Peterson, was a well-meaning man who did his best with minimal resources, but he lacked the training and support needed to develop exceptional talent. Luna had considered joining the choir, but the rehearsal schedule conflicted with her work hours and family responsibilities. She remained on the periphery of her school's musical activities, another talented student whose potential went largely unrecognized. As Luna's junior year progressed, she began to encounter information about music schools and conservatories. She discovered institutions like Juilliard, Curtis and Eastman through her internet research, reading about their prestigious programs and legendary faculty with a mixture of awe and despair. The application requirements seemed designed for students from different worlds: expensive pre-college programs, private lesson documentation, competition awards, and recommendation letters from established teachers. The tuition costs were astronomical, more money than her family saw in several years combined. However, Luna also learned about scholarships and financial aid programs designed to support talented students from low-income families. She read stories of musicians who had overcome similar obstacles, artists who had found ways to pursue their dreams despite economic hardship. These discoveries planted seeds of possibility in her mind, though she wasn't sure how to nurture them into reality. The path forward remained unclear, but the destination began to feel slightly less impossible. The community center piano, despite its limitations, had become Luna's most faithful companion. She knew every quirk of its action, every variation in its tone, every key that stuck or buzzed. The instrument had taught her to make music under imperfect conditions, to find beauty despite limitations, and to express herself authentically regardless of circumstances. When she played the simple melodies she had learned as a beginner, they sounded like lullabies. When she attempted the complex works she was still mastering, they sang with promise and potential. Luna's evening practice sessions had developed into a ritual that centered her life. After finishing her homework and helping Carlos with his, after checking that her mother had everything she needed for her night shift, Luna would walk the 6 blocks to the community center. Mrs. Chen always left the building unlocked until 9 o'clock, trusting that the few evening visitors would respect the space. Luna would slip into the music room, turn on a single overhead light, and settle onto the worn piano bench with the reverence of a pilgrim entering a sacred space. The first few minutes of each practice session were spent in communion with the instrument and the music. Luna would play scales and arpeggios, not just as technical exercises but as conversations with the piano. She would listen to how the instrument responded to different touches, adjusting her technique to coax the most beautiful sounds from keys that had known better days. Then she would move into repertoire, working on pieces she was learning and revisiting favorites she had mastered months earlier. Luna's repertoire was eclectic and ambitious, limited only by her ability to find scores and recordings. She had worked through Bach inventions and preludes, finding in their mathematical precision a different kind of beauty than the romantic expressiveness she loved in Chopin. She had attempted Mozart's sonatas, marveling at their apparent simplicity and hidden complexity. She had struggled with Beethoven's passionate outbursts and triumphant resolutions. Each composer offered new challenges and different rewards, expanding her musical vocabulary and deepening her understanding of the piano's possibilities. The process of learning new pieces without a teacher had forced Luna to develop extraordinary musical instincts. She learned to analyze harmonic progressions by ear, to understand formal structures through careful listening, and to make interpretive decisions based on her emotional response to the music. Sometimes she would spend weeks on a single passage, experimenting with different fingerings and phrasings until she found an approach that felt authentic. Other times she would absorb an entire piece quickly, as if the music had been waiting inside her to be discovered. Luna's musical development was uneven in ways that reflected her unconventional education. Her technique was remarkably advanced in some areas while remaining underdeveloped in others. She could play rapid scales with impressive evenness and clarity, having developed finger strength through countless hours of practice on the resistant keys of the community center piano. However, she had never learned proper pedaling technique, and her hand position sometimes suffered from habits developed without professional guidance. These technical inconsistencies didn't diminish the emotional power of her playing, but they represented obstacles she would need to overcome if she ever had the opportunity for formal training. As Luna's abilities grew, so did her awareness of what she didn't know. The more she learned about music theory, the more she realized how much remained to be discovered. The more she listened to professional recordings, the more she understood about subtleties of interpretation and expression that she was still developing. This growing awareness could have been discouraging, but Luna found it exciting. Each new piece of knowledge opened doors to further exploration. Each technical breakthrough enabled her to attempt more challenging repertoire. The community center had become more than just a practice space for Luna. It had become a symbol of possibility existing within limitation. The building's decay reflected the economic struggles of her neighborhood, but its continued operation demonstrated the power of community determination. Mrs. Chen's efforts to keep the center running paralleled Luna's efforts to develop her musical abilities. Both were acts of faith in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances. Luna's mother, Isabella, had begun to notice the changes that music was creating in her daughter. The girl who returned from evening practice sessions was calmer, more centered, and somehow more hopeful than the one who left to do homework and chores. Isabella didn't fully understand classical music, but she recognized its positive effect on Luna's spirit. She had started planning her evening work schedule to ensure that Luna could have uninterrupted practice time, a small sacrifice that represented enormous love and support. Carlos had also become more aware of his sister's musical activities. He often asked Luna to play for him when they were both at the community center, and he would listen with the serious attention of someone who recognized that something important was happening, even if he couldn't fully comprehend it. Sometimes he would bring friends to listen, proudly introducing Luna as his sister who could play like the people on TV. These informal performances gave Luna her first experience of sharing music with an audience, however small and familiar. The approaching spring of Luna's junior year brought with it a growing sense of urgency about her future. College applications would be due the following year, and she needed to begin making concrete plans. The gap between her musical dreams and her practical options felt overwhelming, but Luna had inherited her mother's determination and her father's stubborn refusal to accept limitations. She began researching more actively, looking for programs that might bridge the gap between where she was and where she wanted to be. Through her online research, Luna discovered that some conservatories and music schools held outreach programs designed to identify and support talented students from underserved communities. These programs offered masterclasses, summer intensives, and scholarship opportunities that could provide pathways for students like her. The application requirements were still daunting, but they seemed more achievable than the traditional conservatory route. Luna began to formulate a plan that felt ambitious but not entirely impossible. The first step in Luna's plan was to create recordings of her playing that could serve as audition materials. The community center piano was far from ideal for recording purposes, but Luna was determined to work with what she had. She began saving money from her weekend job to purchase a decent recording device, planning to document her progress and create materials for potential applications. As winter melted into spring, Luna's practice sessions took on new intensity and purpose. She was no longer just playing for the joy of making music, though that remained central to her motivation. Now she was preparing for something larger, though she wasn't entirely sure what form that preparation would take. The community center piano seemed to respond to her heightened focus, as if the instrument understood that they were working towards something important together. Luna's story was still being written, but the foundation had been established. A girl with extraordinary musical talent and an unshakable belief in beauty's power to transform lives had found a way to develop her abilities despite seemingly impossible circumstances. The challenges ahead were enormous, but they were no longer insurmountable. The community center piano had taught her that music could exist anywhere, that talent could develop without privilege, and that dreams could survive even in the most difficult circumstances. The evening light filtering through the cracked windows of the community center seemed different now, charged with possibility and promise. Luna's fingers continued to dance across the worn keys, creating melodies that carried all her hopes and dreams. She was no longer just a girl from the housing projects who loved music. She was becoming a musician, and her journey was just beginning. The opportunity arrived disguised as a routine announcement during morning assembly at Washington High School. Principal Martinez stepped up to the microphone in the gymnasium that doubled as an auditorium, her voice echoing off the water-stained walls as she read from a crisp letterhead that looked expensive even from Luna's seat in the back row. The Pemberton Academy of Fine Arts, one of the city's most prestigious private schools, was hosting their annual Young Musicians Showcase, and for the first time in the event's 12-year history, they were opening auditions to talented students from public schools across the district. Luna felt her heart stop as the words registered. The showcase was a legendary event in the city's classical music scene, featuring performances by the most promising young musicians in the region. Winners received substantial cash prizes, performance opportunities with professional orchestras, and most importantly, scholarship considerations from top conservatories. The deadline for auditions was just 3 weeks away, requiring a live performance of a challenging classical piece not exceeding 8 minutes in length. As students around her chatted about weekend plans and upcoming tests, Luna sat frozen in her plastic chair, her mind racing with possibilities and obstacles. This was the opportunity she had been dreaming of, the chance to prove that talent could emerge from anywhere. However, the location of both the audition and the showcase made her stomach clench with anxiety. The Pemberton Academy was located in Millbrook Heights, the wealthiest district in the city, where mansion-lined streets and luxury cars were as common as broken streetlights and public transportation were in her neighborhood. After school, Luna rushed to the public library and spent hours researching everything she could find about the Young Musicians Showcase. The event's website displayed photographs from previous years, showing perfectly groomed teenagers in elegant concert attire performing on gleaming instruments in a concert hall that looked like something from a fairy tale. The biographical information about past winners read like a catalogue of privilege: students from families of professional musicians, graduates of expensive preparatory programs, recipients of private lessons that cost more per hour than Luna's mother earned in a day. The disparity felt overwhelming, but Luna forced herself to focus on the audition requirements rather than the intimidation factor. She needed to prepare a piece that would demonstrate her technical ability and musical maturity within the 8-minute limit. After reviewing her current repertoire, she decided on Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, a piece she had been working on for months, and one that showcased both her technical skills and her ability to convey deep emotion through music. The piece was ambitious, perhaps overly so, but Luna knew that playing it safe would not be enough to compete with students who had every advantage. Preparing for the audition meant intensifying her already demanding schedule. Luna began arriving at the community center earlier each evening, sometimes practicing until Mrs. Chen had to gently remind her that the building needed to close. The Chopin ballad demanded a level of technical precision and artistic interpretation that pushed Luna to her limits. The piece told a story of heroism and tragedy, requiring a performer to navigate rapid passages, delicate melodic lines, and thunderous climaxes with equal skill. The community center piano, with its missing keys and inconsistent action, presented unique challenges for preparing such a demanding work. Luna had to mentally transpose sections that required notes the instrument couldn't produce, and she had to develop extraordinary finger strength to compensate for keys that sometimes failed to respond properly. However, these limitations also forced her to focus on musical expression, rather than relying solely on technical display. Every phrase had to be shaped with intention, every dynamic change had to serve the emotional narrative of the piece. As word of Luna's audition plans spread through her high school, reactions were mixed and often painful. Some teachers expressed genuine excitement about her opportunity, offering encouragement and support. However, many classmates responded with skepticism that bordered on cruelty. They questioned why she would waste time on something so impractical, suggesting that she was setting herself up for inevitable disappointment. A few students made pointed comments about knowing her place and not trying to be something she wasn't. These reactions stung, but they also strengthened Luna's resolve to prove that talent and determination could overcome social barriers. The most challenging aspect of preparing for the audition was not technical but psychological. Luna had never performed in a formal setting, never worn concert attire, never walked onto a stage in front of judges whose approval could change her life. She practiced her entrance and exit from the community center's small stage area, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. She worked on maintaining composure under pressure, learning to recover gracefully from mistakes, and to continue performing even when her nerves threatened to overwhelm her concentration. 2 weeks before the audition, Luna encountered her first direct contact with the world she was trying to enter. While researching performance videos online at the library, she overheard a conversation between two women discussing their daughters' preparations for the showcase. Both girls were students at Pemberton Academy, both had been working with private teachers for over a decade, and both families were discussing audition strategies with the casual confidence of people accustomed to success. Luna listened with growing apprehension as the women compared notes about their daughters' chosen repertoire, their recent masterclass experiences, and their families' connections within the classical music community. These students weren't just talented, they were products of a systematic approach to musical development that included every advantage money could provide. They had grown up attending professional concerts, participating in summer festivals, and receiving guidance from teachers who were themselves professional performers. Luna realized that she was not just competing against other talented teenagers, she was challenging an entire system of privilege and preparation. However, this realization also clarified something important for Luna. If she was going to succeed, it would have to be based on the authenticity and emotional honesty of her musical voice, rather than trying to imitate the polished perfection of her competitors. She had something that couldn't be purchased, a genuine connection to music born from necessity rather than opportunity, shaped by struggle rather than comfort, and expressed with the urgency of someone for whom music represented hope rather than hobby. The week of the audition brought a new level of stress to Luna's already challenging routine. Her mother had managed to secure time off from one of her jobs to attend the audition, a sacrifice that represented lost income the family could barely afford. Isabella had also somehow found money to purchase Luna a simple but elegant black dress suitable for performance, though Luna suspected this meant her mother had skipped meals or delayed paying bills to afford it. The weight of her family's investment in her dream added pressure to an already overwhelming situation. Carlos had appointed himself Luna's chief supporter and practice audience, sitting through multiple run-throughs of the Chopin Ballet with the serious attention of a professional critic. He offered encouragement between her practice sessions and helped her time her performance to ensure it fell within the 8-minute requirement. His presence provided comfort and normalcy during a period when everything else felt surreal and uncertain. The night before the audition, Luna barely slept. She lay in bed mentally practicing the ballet, her fingers moving silently through the complex passages, while she visualized herself performing on an unfamiliar piano in front of judges whose standards she could only guess at. Every potential mistake felt magnified in her imagination, every technical challenge loomed like an insurmountable obstacle. However, beneath the anxiety was a core of determination that had sustained her through years of self-directed learning. She had come too far to be defeated by fear. The morning of the audition dawned grey and humid, the kind of weather that made Luna's hair curl uncontrollably and caused the community center piano to sound even more out of tune than usual.
She spent an hour at her practice piano, not working on difficult passages, but rather reconnecting with the emotional heart of the piece. The ballad had become part of her musical identity over the months of preparation, and she needed to trust that connection rather than overthinking technical details. The trip to Millbrook Heights required 2 bus transfers and took over an hour, a journey that carried Luna from the familiar rhythms of her neighborhood into an entirely different world. As the bus wound through increasingly affluent areas, Luna watched the landscape transform from corner stores and apartment buildings to manicured lawns and houses that looked like small palaces. The Pemberton Academy itself was more impressive than its website had suggested, a collection of red brick buildings set on perfectly maintained grounds that spoke of traditions and endowments accumulated over generations. Walking through the Academy's main entrance, Luna felt like an imposter despite her careful preparation.
The hallways were lined with portraits of distinguished alumni and display cases showcasing awards and achievements that dated back decades. Students moved through the corridors with the casual confidence of people who belonged, their expensive clothes and instruments as natural to them as Luna's thrift store finds were to her. The contrast was stark and intentionally intimidating. The audition process was held in the Academy's concert hall, a space so beautiful it took Luna's breath away. The room featured soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and perfect acoustics that made even whispered conversations sound elegant. The piano she would be performing on was a concert grand Steinway, an instrument worth more than her family's annual income. Other auditioners were already present, warming up on practice pianos or reviewing their music with private teachers who had accompanied them. Luna found herself studying her competition with a mixture of admiration and intimidation. These students carried themselves with the poise of experienced performers, their instruments gleaming and their sheet music organized in expensive leather folders. They spoke casually about competitions they had won, festivals they had attended, and teachers they studied with, their conversations revealing a level of musical experience that Luna could barely imagine. She overheard discussions of summer programs at prestigious institutions, private coachings with renowned artists, and audition strategies developed through years of professional guidance. The waiting period before her audition slot felt eternal. Luna watched as other students performed, their playing demonstrating technical proficiency and musical sophistication that represented years of intensive training. Each performance was polished and confident, delivered by students who had clearly been prepared for exactly this type of high-pressure situation. Luna began to question whether her months of preparation on the community center piano could possibly compete with such systematic development. However, as she continued to observe, Luna also noticed something else. While the other students played with impressive accuracy and control, there was a certain sameness to their interpretations. They had been taught to play correctly, but many of them seemed to be following prescribed approaches rather than expressing personal musical voices. Their performances were polished but somehow impersonal, technically impressive but emotionally predictable. Luna realized that her lack of formal training, while disadvantageous in many ways, had also preserved something valuable: her individual relationship with the music. When Luna's name was finally called, she walked to the stage with legs that felt unsteady, but with a heart that was surprisingly calm. The concert grand piano sat under warm stage lights, its polished surface reflecting the elegant architecture of the hall. The three judges sat at a table in the front row, their expressions professionally neutral but attentive. One was Dr. Catherine Hartwell, the Academy's director and a renowned pianist in her own right. Another was Professor Michael Chen, who taught at the State University's Music Conservatory. The third was Mrs. Victoria Sterling, a prominent patron of the arts whose family foundation provided significant funding for young musician development programs. Luna approached the piano bench and adjusted it to the proper height, her movements careful and deliberate. The Steinway's action was completely different from the community center piano she was accustomed to, responding to the slightest touch with beautiful complex tones. She placed her hands on the keys and took a moment to connect with the instrument, feeling its capacity for both delicate expression and powerful drama. The opening of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 emerged from the piano with a clarity and richness that Luna had never experienced before. The instrument responded to her touch like a living thing, translating every nuance of her musical intention into sound that filled the concert hall perfectly. The melody line sang with a purity that made Luna's heart soar, while the accompanying harmonies provided a foundation of both support and subtle complexity. As Luna progressed through the piece, she felt her nervousness dissolving into musical focus. The months of preparation on an imperfect instrument had taught her to listen intensely and respond instinctively to what she heard. On this magnificent piano, those skills were magnified, allowing her to shape phrases and color harmonies with a sophistication that surprised even her. The technical passages that had been challenging on the community center piano felt manageable on the Steinway, freeing her to focus on musical expression rather than mechanical execution. The judges began to lean forward in their chairs as Luna's performance unfolded.
They had heard dozens of auditions that day, most delivered by well-prepared students playing familiar repertoire with competent technique. However, there was something different about this performance, something that caught their attention and held it. Luna was not just playing the notes of Chopin's ballad, she was telling its story with a conviction and emotional authenticity that transcended technical considerations. Dr. Hartwell found herself forgetting to take notes as Luna navigated the piece's complex emotional landscape. The opening section spoke of yearning and possibility, played with a tenderness that suggested personal understanding of longing. The contrasting middle section erupted with passion and drama, Luna's entire body engaged in creating sounds that seemed to emerge from deep within her soul. The final section brought resolution and peace, but tinged with the wisdom that comes from struggle. As Luna approached the climactic passages of the ballad, her playing reached a level of intensity and musical commitment that silenced even the whispered conversations in the back of the hall. The technical demands of these sections were considerable, requiring coordination, strength, and precision that typically took years to develop. On the community center piano, these passages had always felt like battles to be won through determination and repetition. On the Steinway, they became opportunities for musical expression, each technical challenge serving the larger emotional narrative of the piece. The final measures of the ballad faded into silence, leaving the concert hall in a state of suspended animation. Luna lifted her hands from the keys and sat quietly for a moment, still connected to the music she had just shared. When she looked up at the judges, she saw expressions that ranged from surprise to genuine amazement. Dr. Hartwell was shaking her head slowly, as if trying to process what she had just heard. Professor Chen was scribbling notes rapidly, his academic training compelling him to document his observations even as his emotional response overwhelmed his analytical faculties. Mrs. Sterling, who had heard hundreds of young musicians over her decades of arts patronage, was staring at Luna with undisguised fascination. She had not expected to be moved by another student audition, particularly not by someone who was clearly outside the traditional conservatory preparation system. However, Luna's performance had touched something deeper than technical appreciation, reaching the emotional core that Mrs. Sterling remembered from her own early encounters with great music. Luna rose from the piano bench and walked to center stage, offering a simple bow to the judges as she had seen other students do. The silence in the hall was profound, but it felt different from the polite quiet that had followed other auditions. This was the silence of people processing an unexpected encounter with authentic artistry, the pause that follows when someone has communicated something important through sound. Dr. Hartwell was the first to speak, her voice carrying a warmth that had been absent during previous auditions. She asked Luna about her musical background, her training, and her aspirations, questions that Luna answered with honest simplicity. When Luna explained that she was entirely self-taught and practiced on an old piano at a community center, the judges exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their recognition of what they had just witnessed. The conversation that followed was unlike any Luna had imagined. Rather than feeling interrogated or judged, she found herself engaged in a genuine discussion about music with people who clearly understood and appreciated what she was trying to accomplish. They asked about her interpretive choices, her connection to the Chopin repertoire, and her future plans with a level of respect that acknowledged her as a serious musician rather than merely a promising student. As Luna left the stage and walked back through the Academy's elegant corridors, she felt transformed by the experience. Regardless of the audition results, she had proven something important to herself. She belonged in that concert hall, her musical voice deserved to be heard, and her years of dedication and sacrifice had prepared her for this moment. The community center piano had been her conservatory, her struggles had been her teachers, and her authentic connection to music had been her greatest asset. The other auditioners were still waiting in the green room, discussing their performances and speculating about results. Luna moved among them quietly, acutely aware that she existed in their world, but was not entirely of it.
Some students looked at her curiously, perhaps wondering about this unknown competitor who had emerged from outside their familiar circle. Others seemed oblivious to her presence, absorbed in their own concerns and conversations. However, Luna no longer felt intimidated by these differences. The piano had been the great equalizer, the place where privilege and preparation mattered less than musical truth and authentic expression. She had communicated something real through Chopin's music, something that connected to universal human experiences of hope, struggle, and transcendence. Whether or not she won the competition, she had won something more important, the knowledge that her musical voice had value and power. As Luna rejoined her mother in the Academy's elegant lobby, Isabella's face reflected pride and amazement at what she had witnessed through the concert hall's open doors. Though she didn't fully understand classical music, Isabella had recognized something extraordinary in her daughter's performance, something that justified all the sacrifices and support she had provided over the years. The two women embraced briefly, sharing a moment of mutual recognition and love that needed no words. The bus ride home took Luna back through the economic geography of her city, from the manicured perfection of Millbrook Heights to the raw vitality of her neighborhood. However, the journey no longer felt like traveling between two incompatible worlds. Luna carried within herself proof that music could bridge any divide, that talent could emerge from anywhere, and that authentic expression could compete with any advantage. The community center piano was waiting for her return, ready to continue the musical education that had brought her to this transformative day. Results would be announced within a week, but Luna already knew that the audition had accomplished something more valuable than any prize. She had stepped fully into her identity as a musician, claimed her place in the classical music community, and demonstrated that dreams backed by dedication could challenge any obstacle. The girl who had discovered music through necessity had become an artist who could hold her own among the most privileged and prepared competitors in the city. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while Luna was stocking shelves at Martina's grocery. Mrs. Chen had Luna's mother's phone number from the community center registration forms, and Isabella had given Luna permission to list it as her emergency contact for the audition. When the phone buzzed in Luna's pocket, she almost ignored it, assuming it was another telemarketer or wrong number. However, something made her step away from the produce section and answer. Dr. Catherine Hartwell's voice on the other end was warm but professional, carrying news that Luna had hardly dared to hope for. She had been selected as one of 12 finalists for the Young Musicians Showcase, earning her a spot in the semi-final round scheduled for the following Saturday. More importantly, she had qualified for the masterclass sessions that would take place throughout the week leading up to the showcase, working directly with renowned faculty from various conservatories and music schools. Luna's hands trembled as she absorbed the information. The semi-final would require her to perform the same piece again, but this time in front of a larger panel of judges that included visiting artists and conservatory admissions representatives. The stakes were higher, but so were the opportunities. Winners would receive scholarships, performance contracts, and most significantly, guaranteed auditions at top music schools, regardless of their background or preparation. The masterclass schedule Dr. Hartwell outlined sounded like a dream and a nightmare simultaneously. Luna would work with Professor Elena Vasquez from the Manhattan School of Music, Dr. James Morrison from the Curtis Institute, and Mrs. Adelaide Pemberton herself, the Academy's founder and a legendary pedagogue whose students had gone on to international careers. These sessions were scheduled during regular school hours, meaning Luna would need to arrange absences that might affect her already precarious academic standing. However, the most challenging aspect of the week ahead was not logistical but social. Luna would be working alongside the other 11 finalists, most of whom were Pemberton Academy students or came from similar privileged backgrounds. She would be entering their world not as a visitor for a single audition, but as a competitor who had earned her place at their table.
The dynamic would be entirely different, and Luna suspected that not everyone would welcome her presence. Principal Martinez was surprisingly supportive when Luna requested the school absences, recognizing the opportunity as potentially life-changing for one of her most dedicated students. She arranged for Luna to receive assignments in advance and connected her with teachers who could provide makeup sessions for any material she would miss. The school's guidance counselor, Mrs. Thompson, even offered to help Luna research scholarship opportunities and college application strategies, understanding that the showcase could open doors that had previously seemed impossible. Luna's family rallied around her success with a mixture of pride and practical concern. Isabella managed to rearrange her work schedule to provide transportation to and from the academy throughout the week, a logistical challenge that required calling in favors with supervisors and co-workers. Carlos appointed himself Luna's personal cheerleader and practice audience, insisting on hearing her play the Chopin ballad every evening to ensure she maintained her performance level. The community center became a gathering place for neighbors and friends who had heard about Luna's achievement. Mrs. Chen posted a congratulatory notice on the bulletin board, and several regular center users stopped by during Luna's practice sessions to offer encouragement and support. The elderly men who played dominoes in the corner began timing their games to coincide with Luna's piano practice, creating an informal audience that boosted her confidence and reminded her that she was representing more than just herself. Sunday evening before the masterclass week began, Luna sat at the community center piano for what felt like a ceremonial practice session. The instrument that had been her teacher, confidant, and concert hall for 2 years suddenly seemed both more precious and more limited than ever before. She had learned to coax beauty from its damaged keys and to work around its limitations, but soon she would be working on instruments that responded to her slightest touch with perfect precision and unlimited expression. The first masterclass on Monday morning took place in a studio Luna had never seen before, a room that seemed designed specifically for individual instruction and intimate musical exploration. The piano was a Steinway Model B, smaller than the concert grand she had auditioned on but still infinitely superior to her practice instrument. Professor Elena Vasquez entered the room with the kind of presence that immediately commanded attention without demanding it, her silver hair pulled back elegantly, and her eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. Luna was not the first student to work with Professor Vasquez that morning, giving her the opportunity to observe the teaching style and expectations before her own session. She watched as Amanda Thornfield, a Pemberton Academy senior, worked through a Rachmaninoff prelude with technical precision and musical sophistication that spoke of years of intensive training. Amanda's playing was flawless in execution and mature in interpretation, the result of systematic development under expert guidance. When Professor Vasquez called Luna forward, she approached the piano with excitement tempered by nervousness. The opening measures of the Chopin Ballad A felt different under the professor's attentive gaze, more exposed and vulnerable than they had during the audition. Professor Vasquez listened without interruption through the entire piece, her expression revealing nothing but focused attention. When Luna finished, the silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Professor Vasquez's feedback was unlike anything Luna had ever received. Rather than focusing on technical corrections or interpretive suggestions, she began by asking Luna to describe her emotional connection to the piece. What did the music represent to her personally? How did she understand the story Chopin was telling through the notes? These questions opened a conversation about musical meaning that went far beyond the mechanical aspects of performance. The professor's approach revealed both Luna's strengths and her gaps in formal musical education. Her emotional understanding of the piece was remarkably mature and authentic, but her knowledge of the historical and stylistic context was limited. Professor Vasquez began filling in these gaps, explaining how Chopin's Polish heritage influenced his compositional style, how the ballade form developed during the Romantic period, and how different performance traditions had shaped the piece's interpretation over time. However, Professor Vasquez also recognized something in Luna's playing that formal training sometimes eliminated rather than enhanced. Her phrasing had an organic quality that came from genuine musical instinct rather than learned convention. Her dynamic choices served the emotional content of the music rather than merely demonstrating technical control. Her tempo flexibility reflected natural breathing and storytelling rather than academic analysis of structural relationships. The session evolved into a collaborative exploration of how Luna's natural musical instincts could be refined and developed without being fundamentally altered. Professor Vasquez suggested technical adjustments that would give Luna more control over her sound production, but she was careful to preserve the emotional authenticity that made her performance compelling. She worked on pedaling techniques that would enhance the harmonic richness of the piece, finger independence exercises that would improve clarity in complex passages, and breathing strategies that would help manage performance anxiety. By the end of the hour, Luna felt as though she had been given a glimpse into a completely different approach to musical learning. Professor Vasquez treated her as a serious artist whose ideas and instincts had value, even while providing guidance that would accelerate her development. The experience was both humbling and empowering, revealing how much she still needed to learn, while validating the musical voice she had developed through years of independent exploration. The other finalists' reactions to Luna's presence were varied and complex. Some, like Amanda Thornfield, treated her with polite curiosity, interested in her unconventional background, but maintaining a certain distance. Others seemed genuinely excited to meet someone whose path to music was so different from their own, asking questions about her self-taught development and community center practice sessions with what appeared to be sincere fascination. However, a third group viewed Luna's success with barely concealed hostility. These students, led by a pianist named Reginald Ashworth III, seemed to consider her advancement to the semi-finals as a threat to the natural order of things. Reginald came from a family of prominent musicians, had been studying piano since age 4, and attended summer festivals that cost more than Luna's family earned in a year. His presence in the competition was assumed rather than earned, the inevitable result of systematic advantages and professional connections. During the lunch break after the first masterclass session, Luna overheard Reginald speaking with several other students near the Academy's elegant dining hall. His voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard and agreed with, and his words cut through Luna's excitement about the morning's musical discoveries. He was questioning whether the competition's new emphasis on diversity was compromising its artistic standards, suggesting that including students from public schools was more about public relations than genuine merit. Reginald's comments were carefully phrased to avoid overtly offensive language, but their meaning was clear. Students like Luna were being given opportunities they hadn't truly earned, taking spots that rightfully belonged to those who had dedicated their lives to serious musical study. Her success in the audition was attributed to judges who were more interested in making a social statement than recognizing genuine artistic achievement. The technical and interpretive sophistication that serious music required could only be developed through formal training and systematic preparation. Amanda Thornfield and several other students looked uncomfortable with Reginald's analysis, but none challenged him directly. The social dynamics of the Academy were complex, and Reginald's family connections made him someone whose approval was sought rather than whose opinions were questioned. Luna realized that she was not just competing musically at the showcase, she was also navigating a social and cultural battlefield where her very presence was seen as controversial. The second masterclass, scheduled for Tuesday afternoon, was conducted by Dr. James Morrison, whose reputation for demanding perfectionism preceded him into the studio. Morrison had trained some of the world's most successful classical pianists, but he was also known for his uncompromising standards and his belief that true artistry required years of systematic development under expert guidance. Luna approached this session with more apprehension than excitement, knowing that her unconventional background would likely not impress someone so committed to traditional training methods. Dr. Morrison's teaching style was immediately different from Professor Vasquez's collaborative approach. He listened to Luna's performance of the ballad with clinical attention, stopping her frequently to address technical issues and interpretive choices. His feedback was precise and demanding, focusing on aspects of her playing that revealed her lack of formal training. Her hand position needed adjustment, her pedaling was inconsistent, and her understanding of Chopin's stylistic requirements was incomplete. However, Dr. Morrison's corrections came with explanations that helped Luna understand the reasoning behind proper technique. He demonstrated how subtle changes in hand position could improve both comfort and sound quality, how systematic pedaling could enhance harmonic clarity without sacrificing emotional expression, and how understanding historical performance practices could inform interpretive decisions. His teaching was rigorous but educational, challenging Luna while providing tools for improvement. The most difficult part of working with Dr. Morrison was his obvious skepticism about her musical preparation. He questioned whether 3 weeks was sufficient time to address the technical deficiencies that typically took years to correct. He wondered aloud whether Luna's natural musical instincts would be enough to compensate for gaps in her formal education. His comments were not cruel, but they were brutally honest about the challenges she faced competing against students with systematic training. Despite his reservations, Dr. Morrison seemed intrigued by certain aspects of Luna's playing. Her musical phrasing had an organic quality that impressed him, even when her technique was imperfect. Her emotional connection to the piece was genuine and compelling, creating moments of real artistic communication, even when technical execution faltered. He began working with her on ways to maintain these strengths while addressing her technical limitations. The session concluded with Dr. Morrison giving Luna a brutally honest assessment of her chances in the competition. Her natural musicality was exceptional, but her technical preparation was insufficient for the level of competition she was entering. She would need to practice more efficiently and focus on specific technical elements if she hoped to compete successfully. However, he also acknowledged that her unconventional background had given her something valuable that couldn't be taught, an authentic musical voice that communicated directly with listeners. Wednesday's masterclass with Mrs. Adelaide Pemberton was the most anticipated and feared session of the week. Mrs. Pemberton was a legend in the classical music world, a teacher whose students had won international competitions and built successful careers on every continent. She was also the Academy's founder and the person whose vision had created the institution where Luna now found herself competing. Her approval could open doors that had never been opened before. Her disapproval could end dreams before they had fully formed. Mrs. Pemberton entered the studio with the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention and respect. She was impeccably dressed and carried herself with the confidence of someone whose opinions had shaped careers and influenced institutions. Her reputation for identifying exceptional talent was matched by her equally legendary intolerance for mediocrity or false pretense. Luna knew that this session would be the ultimate test of whether her musical development could withstand the scrutiny of someone who had heard everything. The studio filled with other finalists who had come to observe the masterclass, creating an audience that added pressure to an already intense situation. Luna could feel Reginald's skeptical gaze and Amanda's curious attention as she approached the piano bench. Mrs. Pemberton settled into her chair with the composed attention of someone preparing to evaluate both performance and potential. Luna's performance of the Chopin ballad felt different under Mrs. Pemberton's gaze, more intense and focused than it had in previous sessions. She incorporated the technical adjustments suggested by Professor Vasquez and Dr. Morrison while trying to maintain the emotional authenticity that seemed to be her greatest strength. The piece unfolded with a combination of technical improvement and expressive commitment that represented her best playing to date. When Luna finished, Mrs. Pemberton remained silent for what felt like an eternity. The room was completely quiet, other students holding their breath as they waited for the verdict that could validate or demolish Luna's aspirations. When Mrs. Pemberton finally spoke, her voice carried the authority of decades spent evaluating musical talent and potential. Mrs. Pemberton's analysis was comprehensive and penetrating, addressing both the strengths and limitations of Luna's performance with equal directness. She acknowledged the remarkable musical instincts that had allowed Luna to develop sophisticated interpretive skills without formal guidance. She recognized the emotional authenticity that made Luna's playing compelling and memorable. She praised the dedication and intelligence that had enabled such rapid improvement in just a few years of self-directed study. However, Mrs. Pemberton also identified significant technical and musical gaps that would need to be addressed if Luna hoped to pursue music at the highest level. Her training was uneven, strong in some areas but deficient in others. Her repertoire knowledge was limited, and her understanding of stylistic conventions was incomplete. Most significantly, her technique, while improving, still lacked the consistency and refinement that serious musical study required. The judgment that followed surprised everyone in the room, including Luna herself. Mrs. Pemberton declared that Luna represented the kind of raw musical talent that appeared only rarely, the type of student who could justify extraordinary measures and investments. Her unconventional background was not a liability, but an asset, providing her with a fresh perspective and authentic voice that formal training sometimes diminished rather than enhanced. Mrs. Pemberton announced that regardless of the competition results, she was prepared to offer Luna a full scholarship to attend Pemberton Academy for her senior year, with additional support for private lessons and summer festival participation. The offer was unprecedented, representing not just educational opportunity, but entry into a musical community that could support Luna's development and career aspirations. The room erupted in whispered conversations as students processed the implications of such an extraordinary gesture. Reginald's reaction to Mrs. Pemberton's offer was immediate and barely controlled. His face flushed with anger and disbelief as he struggled to maintain the composure expected in such a setting. The idea that someone with Luna's limited background could be offered opportunities that he had worked years to earn challenged everything he believed about merit, preparation, and social hierarchy. His whispered comments to nearby students carried venom that was no longer carefully disguised. Luna felt overwhelmed by Mrs. Pemberton's offer and the reactions it had generated. The scholarship represented everything she had dreamed of: access to world-class instruction, opportunities to work with exceptional musicians, and a pathway to conservatory education that had previously seemed impossible. However, it also meant leaving her family, her community, and the familiar environment that had shaped her musical development. The decision would require conversations with her mother and careful consideration of consequences that extended far beyond her personal aspirations. Thursday's preparation time was spent in individual practice rather than masterclass sessions, giving finalists the opportunity to incorporate feedback from their coaching sessions and prepare for the semi-final performance. Luna found herself working in a practice room adjacent to Amanda Thornfield, creating an opportunity for conversation that had been limited during the more formal masterclass sessions. Amanda's approach to Luna was friendly but curious, revealing both genuine interest and subtle probing about Luna's background and preparation. She asked about Luna's practice routine, her musical influences, and her future plans, with the kind of questions that seemed designed to understand how someone from such different circumstances could emerge as serious competition. The conversation was pleasant but carried undertones of evaluation and assessment, Through their discussion, Luna learned more about Amanda's own musical journey and the systematic preparation that had led to her current level of achievement. Amanda had been studying piano for 12 years, attending summer festivals for the past 5, and working with renowned teachers throughout her development. Her family had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in her musical education, viewing it as preparation for a professional career that was assumed rather than hoped for. However, Amanda also revealed some of the pressures and limitations that came with such systematic preparation. Her interpretive choices were heavily influenced by her teachers' opinions, her repertoire was determined by conservatory audition requirements, and her career path was largely predetermined by family expectations. Luna realized that Amanda's advantages came with constraints that limited her artistic autonomy and personal expression. Friday's final practice session was complicated by increased tension among the finalists as the competitive pressure intensified. Reginald had gathered a small group of supporters who shared his skepticism about Luna's rapid advancement, creating a social division that made the practice environment uncomfortable. Their conversations, while carefully modulated, made clear their belief that the competition's integrity was being compromised by social engineering rather than artistic merit. Luna found herself practicing in isolation, avoiding the social dynamics that had become increasingly hostile throughout the week. She focused on the musical elements that had brought her this far, her emotional connection to the Chopin ballad, her authentic voice as an interpreter, and her determination to represent not just herself but everyone who had been told that classical music was not for people like them. The semi-final performance on Saturday morning would determine which 6 finalists would advance to the evening showcase. The stakes were enormous, the pressure intense, and the social dynamics complex. Luna had proven that her musical voice deserved to be heard, but now she would need to demonstrate that it could not only survive but triumph in the face of privilege, prejudice, and systematic disadvantage. As Luna sat at the community center piano for her final practice session before the semi-final, she reflected on the week's experiences and the challenges that lay ahead. She had learned more about music and herself in 5 days than in the previous 2 years of self-directed study. She had also learned about the social and cultural barriers that surrounded classical music, the prejudices that would question her belonging, and the strength she would need to claim her rightful place in the musical world. The upcoming semi-final would be more than just a performance, it would be a statement about talent, determination, and the power of authentic artistry to overcome any obstacle. Luna was ready to make that statement, not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been told that their dreams were too big for their circumstances. The semi-final morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything feel sharper and more intense. Luna woke before dawn in her family's apartment, the familiar sounds of the housing project filtering through thin walls as the building came to life around her. Her mother had already left for her early shift at the school cafeteria, but she had left a note on Luna's pillow with words of encouragement written in careful Spanish cursive, along with a small cross that had belonged to Luna's grandmother. The Academy's concert hall looked different on semi-final day, transformed by additional lighting equipment and camera crews documenting the event for the Academy's promotional materials. Local classical music enthusiasts filled the audience, along with conservatory representatives, music journalists, and families of the competing students. The atmosphere carried an electric tension that made every sound seem amplified and every movement feel significant. Luna arrived early, wanting time to acclimate to the performance environment before the pressure of competition began. She found a quiet practice room and spent 30 minutes reconnecting with the Chopin ballad, not working on difficult passages, but rather centering herself in the emotional landscape of the piece. The music had become her anchor throughout the week's challenges, a constant source of strength and authentic expression that belonged entirely to her. The other finalists gathered in the green room with varying degrees of confidence and anxiety. Amanda Thornfield appeared composed but tense, reviewing her score with methodical precision. Several younger students from local music schools looked overwhelmed by the grandeur of their surroundings. Reginald Ashworth moved through the space with the kind of entitled confidence that suggested he viewed his advancement to the finals as inevitable rather than earned. When the semi-final performances began, Luna was scheduled to perform fifth out of the 12 finalists. This positioning meant she would have time to observe other competitors, while also having to maintain her focus and energy throughout the morning. She watched as the first 4 students delivered polished, technically proficient performances that demonstrated years of systematic training and professional preparation. The first performer, a violinist named Catherine Wright from a prestigious preparatory program, played Bach's partita with crystalline precision and mature musical understanding. Her performance was flawless in execution and sophisticated in interpretation, the kind of playing that represented everything the classical music establishment valued most highly. The audience responded with appreciative applause, and the judges took extensive notes. The second student, a cellist named David Park, performed a movement from the Dvorak cello concerto with passionate intensity and remarkable technical control. His instrument sang with rich, complex tones that filled the concert hall beautifully, and his musical phrasing demonstrated deep understanding of the Romantic style. The performance was both moving and impressive, setting a standard that would challenge every subsequent competitor. Amanda Thornfield's performance of Liszt's Liebestrom No. 3 showcased the technical brilliance and musical sophistication that had made her one of the Academy's most celebrated students. Her playing was elegant and controlled, demonstrating perfect finger independence, subtle pedaling techniques, and interpretive choices that reflected years of study with master teachers. The performance was everything Luna had expected, polished, professional, and completely accomplished. The fourth performer, a pianist named Michael Chen who had no relation to Luna despite sharing her surname, played Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor with thunderous power and dramatic flair. His technical command of the instrument was spectacular, handling the piece's demanding passages with ease while creating moments of genuine emotional impact. The performance demonstrated why he was considered one of the region's most promising young pianists. As Luna's turn approached, she felt a familiar combination of nervousness and excitement that had become her companion throughout the competition process. The week's masterclasses had given her new tools and insights, but they had also revealed the extent of what she still needed to learn. She carried within herself the voices of all 3 master teachers, Professor Vasquez's encouragement of her natural instincts, Dr. Morrison's technical demands, and Mrs. Pemberton's recognition of her exceptional potential. Walking onto the stage, Luna felt the weight of representation that had followed her throughout the competition. She was not just performing for herself but for everyone who had ever been told that classical music was not for people like them. The community center, her mother's sacrifices, Carlos's unwavering support, and the neighbors who had gathered to wish her luck all traveled with her to the piano bench. The Steinway Concert Grand responded to her touch with the same magnificent sensitivity she remembered from her audition, translating every nuance of her musical intention into sound that filled the hall with perfect clarity. The opening measures of the Chopin ballad emerged with the gentle questioning melody that had first captivated her months earlier, but now enriched by her deeper understanding of the piece's structure and meaning.
Luna's performance incorporated the technical refinements she had learned during the masterclass week, while preserving the emotional authenticity that made her playing distinctive. Her phrasing had gained sophistication without losing its organic quality. Her dynamic control had improved without sacrificing spontaneity, and her pedaling enhanced the harmonic richness without muddying the melodic lines. As the piece progressed through its contrasting sections, Luna felt herself entering the transcendent state that represented her deepest connection to music. The audience, the judges, and even the competition itself seemed to fade into background awareness as she focused entirely on communicating Chopin's musical narrative. The technical challenges that had once seemed insurmountable now served the larger expressive purpose, each difficult passage contributing to the emotional arc of the composition. The climactic sections of the ballad allowed Luna to demonstrate not just technical improvement, but artistic maturity that had been accelerated by her intensive week of professional coaching. The thunderous passages spoke of struggle and determination with an authenticity that reflected her personal journey, while the delicate interludes carried the tenderness of someone who understood the precious nature of beauty, discovered against impossible odds. The final measures brought resolution that felt both musical and personal, Chopin's conclusion merging with Luna's own sense of having completed a transformative journey. As the last notes faded into the concert hall's perfect acoustics, the silence that followed felt pregnant with recognition and possibility. When the applause began, it carried a different quality than what had followed previous performances, warmer and more spontaneous, as if the audience had witnessed something unexpected and moving. The judges' immediate reactions were telling. Dr. Hartwell was writing furiously, her usual composure replaced by obvious excitement about what she had just heard. Professor Chen leaned forward in his seat, studying Luna with the focused attention of someone trying to understand how such mature artistry had emerged from such unconventional preparation. Mrs. Sterling, the arts patron whose family foundation supported young musicians, was smiling with the kind of genuine pleasure that suggested personal investment in Luna's success. However, the most significant response came from the panel of visiting conservatory representatives who had been invited to observe the semi-finals. These were the admissions officers and faculty members whose approval could open doors to the most prestigious music schools in the country, people whose recognition could transform Luna's amateur status into professional possibility. Several were taking detailed notes, others were exchanging meaningful glances, and one was already reaching for his phone, presumably to contact colleagues about the remarkable talent he had just discovered. Reginald's performance followed immediately after Luna's, creating a direct contrast that highlighted the differences in their approaches to music and preparation. His technical command was flawless, his interpretive choices were sophisticated, and his stage presence reflected years of professional coaching. However, his playing lacked the emotional authenticity and personal voice that had made Luna's performance so compelling. The music was correct in every detail but somehow impersonal, as if filtered through layers of academic instruction that had refined away spontaneity and individual expression. The remaining semi-final performances maintained the high standard that had characterized the entire competition, but none generated the kind of immediate response that had followed Luna's Chopin ballad. The other students played beautifully and competently, demonstrating the benefits of systematic musical education and professional preparation, but their performances felt predictable in ways that Luna's had not. When Dr. Hartwell announced the 6 finalists who would compete in the evening showcase, Luna's name was called second, a positioning that reflected both her advancement and her status as one of the competition's most compelling stories. The other 5 finalists included Amanda Thornfield, whose technical brilliance was undeniable, David Park, whose cello playing had moved the entire audience, Michael Chen, whose Rachmaninoff had been spectacular, and 2 other students whose performances had demonstrated exceptional ability and preparation. Notably absent from the finalist list was Reginald Ashworth, whose flawless but impersonal performance had failed to generate the enthusiasm needed for advancement. His elimination sent shockwaves through the Academy's student body, challenging assumptions about privilege, preparation, and the judges' priorities. The message was clear: technical perfection without emotional authenticity was insufficient at the highest levels of musical competition. The announcement of Luna's advancement to the finals created immediate controversy within certain circles of the Academy community. Some faculty members and students questioned whether the judges were prioritizing novelty over established excellence, whether social considerations were influencing artistic decisions, and whether the competition's integrity was being compromised by pressure to diversify its winners. These conversations took place in hushed tones but with obvious intensity, revealing fault lines within the classical music community about access, merit, and representation. However, other voices emerged to support Luna's advancement and challenge the assumptions underlying the criticism.
Professor Vasquez publicly praised Luna's musical instincts and interpretive maturity, arguing that her unconventional background had preserved qualities that formal training sometimes diminished. Dr. Morrison, despite his earlier skepticism, acknowledged that Luna's rapid improvement and authentic musical voice represented exactly the kind of potential that justified extraordinary opportunities and investments. Mrs. Pemberton's response to the controversy was characteristically direct and uncompromising. She reminded critics that the competition's purpose was to identify exceptional musical talent regardless of its source, and that Luna's advancement was based entirely on artistic merit as demonstrated through blind auditions and public performances. She noted that the classical music world's long-term health depended on attracting diverse voices and perspectives, and that Luna represented exactly the kind of fresh energy the field needed to remain vital and relevant. The afternoon between the semi-final and final showcase provided time for Luna to process her advancement and prepare for the evening's performance. She returned briefly to the community center, needing to reconnect with the space and instrument that had nurtured her musical development. The old upright piano seemed even more humble after a week of working with concert grands, but it also felt like returning home after a long journey. Carlos was waiting at the community center, having skipped school to spend time with his sister before the most important performance of her life. They sat together in the familiar practice room while Luna played through sections of the ballad, not for rehearsal purposes but for the comfort of sharing music with someone who had supported her journey from its earliest stages. Carlos listened with the same serious attention he had always shown, understanding that his presence provided grounding and perspective that Luna needed. Isabella arrived directly from her cafeteria shift, still wearing her work uniform but carrying the elegant dress she had somehow managed to purchase for Luna's final performance. The dress was simple but beautiful, appropriate for a serious classical music performance while reflecting the family's careful attention to budget constraints. More importantly, it represented Isabella's unwavering support for her daughter's dreams and her determination to ensure that Luna would take the stage with dignity and pride. The final showcase began at 7 o'clock with a formal reception for judges, conservatory representatives, and major donors to the Academy and its programs. Luna felt out of place among the elegantly dressed attendees who moved through the reception with the easy confidence of people accustomed to such events. However, she also noticed that several people sought her out specifically, introducing themselves as admirers of her semi-final performance and supporters of her musical development. One particularly meaningful encounter was with Dr. Sarah Chen, the Dean of Admissions at the Eastman School of Music, who had traveled specifically to hear the final showcase. Dr. Chen expressed genuine excitement about Luna's unconventional background and authentic musical voice, suggesting that conservatory education was most successful when it built upon natural talent and personal expression, rather than trying to create musicians from predetermined molds. Another significant conversation was with James Whitfield, a successful concert pianist who served on the boards of several major music festivals and competitions. Whitfield had built his career after growing up in circumstances similar to Luna's, and he recognized both the challenges and opportunities that came with entering the classical music world as an outsider. He offered practical advice about navigating conservatory politics, maintaining artistic authenticity while developing technical skills, and building a professional network that could support long-term career development. The final showcase took place in the Academy's main concert hall, which had been transformed into an elegant venue befitting the evening's significance. The stage was decorated with flowers donated by local businesses, the lighting had been adjusted to create appropriate ambiance for each performance, and professional recording equipment captured every moment for posterity. The audience included not just families and friends of the competitors, but also music critics, conservatory faculty, professional musicians and arts patrons whose presence elevated the event's importance. Luna was scheduled to perform fourth out of the 6 finalists, a position that allowed her to benefit from the audience's warmed attention while avoiding the pressure of opening or closing the evening. She watched from backstage as the first three competitors delivered performances that justified their advancement to the finals, each demonstrating exceptional ability and artistic maturity that represented the best of their generation's classical music talent. When Luna's moment arrived, she walked onto the stage with calm confidence that reflected her week of intensive preparation and the support system that had brought her to this moment. The concert hall was completely full, with additional seating added to accommodate the larger-than-expected audience. Camera crews documented her entrance for the Academy's archives, and she could see her mother and Carlos in the front row, their faces glowing with pride and anticipation. The performance of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 that followed was the culmination of Luna's musical journey to that point, incorporating everything she had learned while preserving the authentic voice that had distinguished her from the beginning. Her technical execution reflected the week's intensive coaching, her interpretive choices demonstrated deepened understanding of the piece's structure and meaning, and her emotional commitment created moments of genuine transcendence that elevated the performance beyond mere competition into the realm of authentic artistry. As the final notes faded into the concert hall's elegant acoustics, the audience response was immediate and overwhelming. The standing ovation began before Luna had even risen from the piano bench, and it continued for several minutes as judges, faculty, and audience members expressed their appreciation for what they had just experienced. Several professional musicians in the audience were visibly moved, and the conservatory representatives were already discussing among themselves the implications of what they had witnessed. When the final results were announced an hour later, Luna's name was called as the competition's grand prize winner, earning her a substantial cash award, guaranteed conservatory auditions, and most importantly, recognition as one of the region's most promising young musicians. However, the real victory was not the official prize, but the transformation she had undergone throughout the competition process, from a self-taught dreamer practicing on a broken piano to a serious artist whose voice deserved to be heard by the world's most prestigious musical institutions. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.